Close the door. So Chase, it's Cody, me, and Anne Marie. Mike's here too. Pam, obviously our AV and IT guys, but Anne Marie and Cody met with Kristen and Jody on Friday as part of a finance committee meeting to do an initial rollout. I was in Mexico, but I had a call with Cody and Anne Marie that morning. They brought me up to speed on what was going on and what they were going to do, and then Anne Marie did a follow-up. But so, with that, again, Kristen and Jody have heard this. It's recorded and video and audio recorded. So Hi and Jim can see it if they want to also. But so we'll go through at a pretty high level of what the budget looks like and our philosophy. And then we'll have a document for you when you get here. You can take a look at it. And we're not asking for any approvals today. Certainly if you end up having questions. And then as part of the formal meeting, we'll do again, just kind of a very quick high level, because High will be here. High is not part of this meeting. It's just you, you and Kristen.
Cool. I feel special.
And so again, Kristen has heard a lot of this. So we're sort of at a crossroads, or we're coming up to one pretty quickly as to what kind of mix we really want to have here at Boise Center. And I think this is where the board's going to weigh in, or we're going to ask the board to weigh in a little bit more within the next year, particularly because we have a situation where, we're doing 65 plus conventions. And while the conventions are tremendous for economic impact, they really don't do a lot financially most of the time for Boise Center. We do a lot of discounting. I think 600,000 is in the budget for next year in just room discounts. And again, that's not saying anything is bad. We have to do what we have to do to get business. And again, these contracts get signed up to 2-3 years, even a little longer once in a while, but at least 2 to 3 years in advance of the event. So what happens is by the time the event gets here, market conditions could have changed. Our circumstances could have changed. And that's what we're seeing. In fact, I think the discounts for next year for room night discounts is the highest that we've ever had, or pretty close. So again, not bad. It's just sort of our cost of doing business. It's what we do for the community, for our hotel partners, particularly to get business. And I think you've heard us talk about the fact that a lot of the hotels now are restricting the number of rooms they're making available for group blocks. So really we're relying more on a few hotels to provide the biggest blocks, i.e. the Grove Hotel. And Vicky's been great because she'll include the Courtyard and Hotel 43 in those blocks, as well as the Grove Hotel. But then you have the Residence, the Hampton, and then maybe the Hyatt that we're relying on for room blocks. And quite frankly, they're restricting those room blocks because they're doing so well on the leisure side. So again, we've got a couple of other challenges there. The other thing is our demand locally has grown to the point where there's just not enough space. Again, you've heard us talk about that in the board meetings, that anything we add isn't really going to be for conventions. It's going to be for local events. So our margins are being squeezed because of a couple of factors. One, capital demands. With 2 buildings, we're gonna have more more resources from the district to help with that over time. But labor has been a big one. There's cost of goods sold. That's another one. Labor's been the biggest hit this year. But then as you take a look at our contributions to the CVB, which I don't suggest we reduce in any way. I want to make sure that's on record. But it's something that over the next couple of years we're going to have to analyze, because of the way the contract works with the CVB is, their contract is really based on the number of leads and the amount of room nights they can help us generate, which is really, I mean, they're a referral service, so it's not even, they can refer the leads, but then it's up to us to manage those leads. So, those numbers probably won't change moving forward, but that's part of the contract with them. But again, the contributions that we make to them have been pretty much at 10% a year. And I believe, Carrie and I haven't had a formal conversation yet. So we put a 10% increase in the budget. But again, it's those sorts of things that really start crimping the margins. And the more we take conventions, those margins get squeezed even more. So the budget this year is probably going to have the tightest margins that we've frankly ever had. Not that I don't think we'll outperform it. I do. We've had a pretty consistent record of outperforming our budgets. We tend to be very conservative going into the budget season, but by the end of the year, we've normally done a really good job in generating more revenue and fewer expenses and thus better margins than we've actually gone in with the budget. So I'm pretty proud of that, but we are protective. So unless there's other highlights, I'll turn it over to Anne Marie and Cody and let them talk more about maybe the numbers themselves.
And then just to add, insurance rates is the other piece of that we're seeing a significant increase that's kind of pinching the margins down. So with what Pat highlighted, labor, cost of goods, insurance, and then room discounts and CVB are kind of where I'm starting to see a lot of our pinches on the margins that we're continuing to see reduced from year over year since opening East, and then capital needs as well. So,
and insurance is twofold. Health insurance, the health insurance benefit we offer our full-time employees has gone up drastically in 2022, and we're projecting not as drastic an increase for 23. We haven't got the exact numbers yet, but we're hearing somewhere from 8 to 10%, which is again fairly significant based on the total that the cost of health insurance is. And we subsidize the health insurance for the employees. I think it's 80-20. So we pick up 80%, the employee picks up 20. So again, we're going to have to be looking at some of those things over the course of the next year as well. We already are having the person who helps us with our benefit plan. She's already shopping for us, taking a look at what some of the options are. But for right now, we're with Regents, and there's no plan to change that. The plan is effective through, I think it's May 1st. So but the health insurance is one part of insurance, but then the other part is the insurance we carry on the facilities. It continues to go up again fairly drastically over the last couple of years. And I don't know, and I think we're meeting with Adam Guyton in the next couple of weeks to go over what the policy looks like for next year.
So in the budgets, and I have handouts for you when you get here, Chase, we're projecting tax revenues to be at 9.8 million, which is about a $370,000 increase over this year. And this year is obviously going to be a record year for us as well. So, and then the revenues on the Boise Center side, we're projecting to be at 8.7 million. It's probably the largest revenue increase I think we've budgeted.
Yeah, it's not probably, it is.
Because I mean, normally we don't take, but budget a $700,000 increase, which would be almost 9%. But
So is that being budgeted that way because of what's already on the books?
Yes. So what we do, we have a forecasting process. We go through and when we bring the event in, we forecast out what we think that the food, the beverage, the AV, room rental will be, and discounts. When we do it, they're conservative. So when we take then the forecast and bump it some, because we know, and we don't forecast, there's a few areas we don't forecast because they're not material enough. And so then that bump that takes that into consideration. So we went through and we looked at it multiple ways. We looked at what our average revenue is per event, an event type and took that times the total events that we had on the books, and we approached it, you know, just took what we thought sales were gonna be for this year and added 7%. Every number we looked at came in somewhere between 8.4 and 8.7 million. So the 8.7 is aggressive for us, but we still think it's attainable.
They had to pick me up off the floor when they told me that, Chase.
Fair enough. Okay.
Part of that is we're changing the way we budget just a little bit. Like Pat says, we've always under budgeted revenues and over budgeted expenses. And the purpose for that was to make sure that the transfers budgeted out of the district were sufficient, that it didn't leave the district with a surprise and the center without money. So what we did this year is we said, let's go ahead and not be quite so conservative on revenues and not quite so conservative on expenses, and we just bumped the transfers. So we added 10% of the operating transfer as a buffer on, so that we still are compensating for that, but allowing our management team to have a budget that is hopefully more closely approximates their activities and gives them expense lines that are more closely related to their activities. So we should see coming into this next year, as you know, Chase, we sit here and we go every month through the combined income statement and show, you know, we're $1.3 million within budget. The losses are $1.3 million less than budget for the Boise Center. We should be seeing next year when we go through this some more negative variances. And so then we'll be explaining those. So it will, I think, lend more, make the budget more useful for everybody and help you guys understand and have explanations. I mean, I know one of the things Jody says is you don't have any negative variances, right? Well, next year we're going to expect to see some negative variances, because those negative variances should be telling us that the train's starting to get off the track. And so that's where we're trying to get to with the budget. So anyway, with the Boise Center, we're forecasting 250 local events, 67 conventions, and $24 million in economic impact. We went back and looked at what we had projected for this year in the bond. And that's what we projected for this year in the bond. It's you know, we got there a different way, right? We didn't have COVID in the middle, but that our 5-year forecast for the bond, I thought that was kind of interesting. Our revenue is split about 50-50 between conventions and local events. And one of the conversations we had with Cody and Pat and Kristen and Jody was, as we continue to increase and have more conventions and we push the local events out, it is compressing our gross margin, which means our margin is about 6% lower than it is year to date. And when you take that and figure out how much cash that is, that's almost $550,000 in cash. So when you look at the transfers, that's one of, you can look right there and go, we know that the decline in the gross margins using $550,000.
And that's just this one year, right? Because what was it several years ago? Was it
It was
26?
30 something.
30,
34% or so.
34%.
I
and now
brought
we're
that
down
because I
to-
knew
what is it?
it was 33.4 in 17.
Yeah.
Then it went to 32 and then 28, 16, and we're down to about 10.
So that's
So-
a pretty big decline.
And it's because, as we said, as we increase the conventions, so that's one of the discussions we wanted to have with the board, is to sit down and take a look and say, at what point how much economic impact do we want? Because we can buy economic impact. We can, as Pat has said, we can give discounts or whatever to get the conventions in here. But if it's affecting our gross margin, we're just going to continue to increase the losses in the Boise Center, which will continue to absorb the tax revenues from the district. And so we just want to make sure that the board's making a conscious decision. If that's what they want to do, that's fine. We just want to have that discussion.
Yeah, and so Chase, just for history, in the past, the board has really focused more on economic impact, i.e. more conventions versus local. And then our discussion with the finance committee, it was really like, okay, well, it has to come to a point to where if we continue that trend, there will be no money to manage because we will continue to just deplete so it really comes more of, okay, we need to balance things a little bit more. And, in our discussion, we thought, okay, let's give a little more leeway for revenue management to the center staff. And I think they've got some ideas on how that can be obtained, and really say, okay, maybe we shouldn't be, so focused on solely economic impact, but really more revenue management and making a good mix, because like Anne-Marie said, we can buy economic impact. We can spend all our money getting a bunch of people here with no revenue on the center. But I think there has to be some rebalancing to that. And I think that was the finance committee's thoughts and recommendations, is to say, okay, board, what do you guys think? If we continue on this path, we may be shooting ourselves in the foot. And I know Jody had mentioned, gosh, after this discussion, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he did mention, kind of it's more equal weighting is in his mind as far as conventions and local events. And I was kind of more 60-40, but I could be talked into 50-50 on the convention side. But I definitely think that it's something we need to reevaluate.
And Chase, I'm not sure, in the circles that you're in, or certainly Kristen and the rest of the board, but we're wrestling right now with like Festival of Trees. They want us to do more than we're willing to at this point. So the constituents that you see day in and day out, or that you interact with socially or whatever it is, those organizations that they belong to, there's a lot of those organizations that have had a tough time either finding space or getting enough space that they really need or want, because of the compression from the conventions. And, there was a concern mentioned in one of our internal meetings about, well, what about the hotel folks? How would they feel about us, maybe, not being so aggressive on conventions? And the fact of the matter is, when you look at the STAR report, and I talked to those hoteliers, I know the GMs of some of the downtown hotels, and particularly the bigger ones, and my conversations with them, they're a little bit ambivalent because of the leisure demand. They're making so much money right now, and I'll talk about that in the regular part of the meeting. But again, they're to the point where they're helping with conventions, but I think it's more of a favor to us than it really is a benefit to them. And so I think for us to pull back conventions a bit, and obviously we have to have them, and that's part of our DNA, and that's part of what we do to operate downtown. But I think we can be a little less aggressive on conventions, opening up more space for local events, which as a board, those are your constituents, and you'll be keeping those folks happier.
Yeah.
And not risk any bad ill will with the hoteliers. They'll continue to be fine and happy in what we're doing. So I think we can find that, and I think we need to start that now, quite frankly, because contracts are already signed for 23. So pretty much what's done for 23 is done, although there are some short-term conventions that we can actually take a look at. We don't know what those are, obviously, but we always get calls in the year for the year. And we can actually take a harder look, like we did this year, at saying no to certain events and yes to others. But really, for the sales side, it's going to be, the impact's going to start being 24, 25. Pardon me. So the decisions we make today really will have some minor impact in 23, but really on the sales side, it'll be 24, 25 and beyond. Just so, again, just so you're aware of the timing of it, it's not going to be an immediate anything.
And Chase, just for your awareness, some of the things that we presented to Jody and Kristen as far as ideas tightening down room discounts. We already actually took a kind of a brush at that for this year, knowing that we were looking at kind of some of our margins already. And so Ally did look at that. However, like Pat's saying, is some of these discounts have been in place for 2 years from the contract side. So what we've got this year is about a $400,000 more in room discounts than historically we ever have. So I think going forward, tightening those down, be a little bit more targeted on revenue for some of those conventions. And then opening possibly the booking window for local events to allow us to revenue manage the space a little bit better. And that's again, an open discussion right now and nothing that's been decided, but there was a number thrown out about 18 months. Right now, we're at a 12-month booking window for local events. So we talked about possibly opening that up to an 18-month window with possibly a premium for people that want to jump on the calendar a little sooner. And then just raising rates. I mean, the apples get eaten from all different angles here from the margin. So I think that again, the approach is kind of not one-sided in how we solve this. It's got to be looked at from a very wide range, 360-degree angle of where we can get back some of our margins. And it's going to be a little bit here and there because that's where we're seeing it go. So I think we can get back to a better gross profit margin, but it is going to take a 2-3 year process to watch those kick back up.
I mean, from your side, you know the local events that are really a revenue generator and they're local, are loyal and come back every year. And so identifying those isn't going to be, too difficult to do. And, and from my mind, as far as taking care of local community organizations is as much of our purview as it was to, economic impact. So to me, it doesn't really change the goals, I think, of the district. It's really just kind of rebalancing a little more.
And it's knowing your market a little bit. I mean, right now, to the leisure demand on the hotel side, the amount of space that we have and the amount of hotel rooms available is something that the district probably just, as that number changes, we can kind of reevaluate year to year
Right.
and look at, because there's going to be hopefully again a day where we can continue to incentivize groups here because we got all the hotel rooms open and all the space available because we've expanded or more hotels have come into the
Yeah,
market.
if we get a big hotel that comes in and if we get more.
And then we can change our strategy a little bit. But at this point in time, I think we're seeing what it is and we're kind of knowing that Boise's market is what it is right now. So from the sales side, that's kind of want to make sure that we're getting our event managers, our sales team together going forward with the board's kind of direction on economic impact versus revenue. And I think I'm hearing from you guys that it's a 50-50, and I think that's probably the right way to go. It does allow us to manage the space and the calendar a little bit better based on those things that we've talked about.
And being in the service industry for us, some of the service sector, like fast food restaurants, that kind of thing, can automate it, whether it be a McDonald's or wherever else you go in, they have the kiosks and you can, or even stadiums now. I mean, there's a lot of, things that have gone where more electronic. Unfortunately for us, labor is going to probably always be one of our biggest, probably the biggest expense that we have short of capital expense.
Unless we start seeing some robot servers on the
I mean,
Capitol.
it's-
plant.
Well, I gotta tell you, there's been a couple of articles out that robot servers are being experimented with in some hotels. And I don't know that they made it into the convention centers yet, but I know that there's a couple of hotel companies who are actually, they had pictures of these robots with drink trays and that sort of thing. And, it's fascinating. So it's, but
where we're looking is more behind the scenes to automate as much. I mean, we're guest experience and customer service oriented. So I'd probably be, my last look would be to go the human element that's taking care of our client or the guest. But the robot vacuums is something that the ops team is looking into right now. So the Roomba on a commercial size for a big convention center. So we clear the room for 2 hours at night, put that on, the team goes over and resets another room and they come back and the vacuum has done its job and now they can start setting that room. So there are some efficiencies we can pick up from automation, but to Pat's point, not to that same level. And it's also not being developed on the scale for convention centers like it is for small kind of restaurant style.
So, I'm sure, just wondering, because we did the calculation, or the smart people here did the calculation for the aquatic center or aquatic facility, whatever we call it. And the sort of room taxes that were generated by that, which benefited the district. So I'm assuming you guys do this, but so for our 64, 5 or whatever, I can't remember, it was 2 minutes ago, the number of conferences that we will have.
okay.
So they generate, do we know generally how much they generate in terms of
revenues and economic impact, we do
Well,
forecast.
I was thinking about our.
Yeah.
Room nights. So yeah, that's what we tend to get the economic impact and knowing also we ran this through on several different events and there is one, and I'll use it as an example and almost feel bad because it's probably the black sheep of the conventions that we booked, and it's not necessarily that way, but we have a botany group in 23 that we offered $94,000 in room rental discounts. It's going to bring in about 1.2 million in economic impact. So awesome economic impact generator. For the Boise Center, it'll bring in probably less than $10,000 in revenue, and that's before my cost of goods sold has been purchased. So probably a break even or a loss for that event. So as you start looking at these types of business, it's during June, so it's during a time, and that's when I remember having this conversation with Ali, is we got aggressive to get a piece of business during a month where we kind of haven't had those type of conventions. So we went aggressive. It's going to bring a lot of economic impact and heads and beds, but at the end of the day, it's about $15,000 in hotel taxes, to your point, Mike, that would bring in for that event. So $94,000 for $15,000 and a break even for the center. Great piece of business for the local economy, but
Not
kind of a dog
necessarily
for our
correct.
budget.
Yeah, on both ends.
And I don't have it with me. I left it down in the office. It's Ally's monthly sales report. But I want to say they generate probably, I shouldn't even go there, but I want to say probably 75, 80,000 room nights a year at least. I think July alone this year had 22,000 room nights associated with events, which is, it's a lot of room nights. I mean, those, in fact, that's 22 sounds a little high. For what I'm saying. But anyway, the sales team, I mean, collectively, yeah, I mean, the conventions drive room nights, which Dakota's Point drives that economic impact. Because room rates are the highest part of economic impact.
Right.
And then the daily spend of people from out of town is obviously a lot more, you know, than people who are attending a local event downstairs today. So.
But so gosh, if we had no conventions, you're effectively probably only losing $700,000 or $800,000 of room taxes. Sorry, I don't want to think of that as a negative, but I'm just thinking it's not that.
Oh,
Again, it's not that gigantic, given you guys are 9.7 million.
Well,
9.8 million, whatever it is you're expecting for room taxes. I mean,
well, and if you take a look at again, I'll talk about it in the regular board meeting, but demand of them. I've been told by some hoteliers that they've intentionally continued to drive their rates in this market higher and higher and higher. Hey, Jay. In an effort to actually reduce occupancy. You know, just keep taking your rates up until people just simply stop staying with you. They'll find somewhere else to stay because they don't have enough staff to do, for instance, to do the rooms. So the one hotelier told me that they're cleaning rooms once per 5-night stay. So you have to stay 5 nights before the room automatically gets cleaned. Now they'll do cleaning on demand or on request.
Right.
But otherwise, if you're staying at a hotel for 2 or 3 nights, you're not going to see a room attendant. They'll replace towels, they'll give you more toilet paper, whatever you want, but at
that's
the end,
nice.
but you know, but they're not going to, they don't have enough room attendants. And so they keep driving the rate. Well, the problem is the people keep paying the rate, which is good for us. But, you know, and I think the point you're starting to make too is, you know, how many more rooms come into the market because of conventions that would have already been booked on the leisure or transient side? So are we, you know, so how many leisure transient rooms are being displaced by convention attendees that actually pay normally a lower rate than the transient leisure? And because, I mean, that was a question I had in a conversation. Well, you know, if we start reducing conventions, then is that going to reduce demand? Or actually, it obviously will reduce demand, but at least on one side, but will the leisure transit side pick up that demand at a higher rate? Which is precisely what's happening in the market right now, and why the hoteliers, if we reduce conventions, they're not going to complain a bit. And you know, and the other thing is, Anne Marie has run a great analysis on the new hotels that are either under construction currently or in the planning stages to start construction in the next few months. And what that might look like from a room tax perspective in 23, late 23, and then 24 and beyond as these hotels start to open. And again, there was some concern about, well, if we start reducing conventions, are those new hotels going to be complaining to us that, you know, we're not putting enough demand back in the market, but the number of rooms they can offer, if it's 125, 130 room hotel, you're only going to get probably 20, 25 rooms at max anyway for a convention. So really, how much of an impact are we going to have on that facility? And the answer is probably minimal. A lot of these smaller properties will rely on compression, or they might get involved. But again, there were meeting planners here this week with Connect that I'll talk about in the regular meeting. They expressed concern. I mean, across the board, I didn't hear one negative comment about anything while they were here, whether it be the facility or the city or whatever. Everybody loved it. But the concern was the number of available hotels for groups of 500 to 700, and the meeting planner, Kristen, who would have to manage the housing or the attrition rates for multiple hotels. It's something that the meeting planners express concern in. They would love to bring some of their groups here. It's just a matter of how much do they want to have to manage the room blocks.
I think that sums it up. No. Did you have some?
How do we get to the next step? Or is there going to be suggestions from staff on what to do and what can make sense for us to review? And then from there, we discuss and figure out if there's a vote that needs taken to go one way or another?
I don't know that it needs to be a vote as much as just some consensus that, you know, I think what'll probably happen, unless you all want to handle it differently. I mean, when we present the final budget in October, and that you'll have to vote on and approve. But I think part of maybe some narrative that will go along with that will be, here's the direction we're going unless we hear otherwise. So I don't want to put the board in a position of having to vote necessarily. I'd rather have you, you know, tell us if we're going down a road you don't want us to go. So basically, I'll let you know what we're doing, and then ask forgiveness if you tell me to do something else.
Because Jody has already heard this
Yep.
kind of conversation, and he's mentioned
Yeah, we said.
like 50-50, and I've heard this. Jim and I have not, but I know that we can connect with them later.
Well, this is recorded, and it's both video and audio recorded. So Hi and Jim, if they want, can go back and watch this.
I'll try.
So-
I'll listen too, so.
For High, I would like to say that the cash will stay flat. So right now we have about 22 million in the bank. And if you remember this chart that's on the front, where we go through and we do the deductions for some of the needs we have, it comes down to available to invest of about 3.2 million. So that doesn't change, the cash doesn't change substantially. The budget that we've put together between the needs for Capital Center and the needs for the aquatic will basically use all of the revenues next year. So we won't be going backwards, but we won't be gaining a lot.
But this is really more of a long-term play
Yep,
on,
exactly.
okay, do we want to refocus a little bit?
In the aquatics is a number that's in there that wouldn't be long-term in there either on that side, so those numbers will start to balance out a little better.
So yes, it's a long-term, it's changing the long-term strategy on booking policy. And so again, it'll be more informative of here's how we're going to start changing our strategy unless we get down the road and make a different suggestion to the board. And so if no one from the board gets adamant about that change, then we'll move on that change with the board's knowledge, and then see how it all works.
Thoughts? Geez.
looks good on paper.
That's actually, I wanted to see it on paper. Like, what does the balance do and how does that play out? And so I can just look at it and it all sounds like it makes sense, right? Yeah, revenue is done better here, get less room taxes there because they're getting travel and leisure rather than this. The only thought is, and you started to cover it, is if travel and leisure dips and that's at the same time when we're also reducing conventions, do we then drop below, say, 65% occupancy in the hotels? And then they start to come back, but we've already pivoted.
That's the problem with this industry and this cycle, because again, we're always at least 2 years out. I mean, again, unless my financial advisor has a better crystal ball than he's giving me credit, or he's showing to me, you know, we just, obviously, we don't know what the future holds. So, yeah, in 23, I mean, let's say next year, market goes down, but we've already got 65, 67 conventions. That's great. So that'll maintain, but if it continues into 24, actually, we're already half pre-sold for 24 too. So again, really what we're looking at is second half of 24 into 25 and beyond. So as the cycles change, the business cycles change, we're going to lag. I mean, that's just the nature of it. And I don't think even having spent time on the hotel side, as long as we're being proactive the best we can and reactive to what's going on in the market. Again, the hotels have to cooperate. I mean, right now they're going, we don't really want a lot of convention rooms. And there are a couple of hotels during the summertime, they're going, we've got so much demand that we're not going to play, you know, in good size hotels. Because they simply have so much of their own leisure and transient demand. And so, again, that sort of limits us. So all of a sudden, let's say the market drops to a 65% occupancy, which would be significant. I mean, because we're running 80 now. So, I mean, you drop 15 points, there's something big going on. We're back to 2008, 2009, right? But even with that being said, while we had the biggest, you know, recession we'd seen in a very long time, we never lost a group that entire, from 08 through 2010. We never lost a group because of cancellation. Now, the attendance in some cases was down, and there were a couple of local events, particularly like the Realtors, which is one of our biggest, right, local events from a revenue standpoint. I mean, they reached a point in, I think it was 2009, 2010, where they went to the Riverside because there were only a couple hundred people and it was a reception. I mean, it wasn't even a dinner. And now you look at what it was like here before that, and even last year when they came back after COVID, or let's use 2019 as an example. I mean, it was, I don't know, 1,100, 1,000. And it was, I mean, it was a big event. So, and again, the one that they had this year was not as big as that one, but it went really well. And again, they're already planning for 23. So they're a good example of what can happen. I mean, we lost them for a couple of years just because their numbers dropped so much. But again, long-winded answer, we're always going to be behind the curve. All we can do is again, balance the best we can. Again, if the hotels aren't giving us rooms for 24 and the market goes down at 24, it's like, well, we tried.
Sorry, yeah.
But so.
And this isn't like going from 67 conventions to 7. It's like a minor.
I mean, it might be going
Right,
back
it's
to,
not-
I hate to even use numbers, but even if we go back to 55.
And making sure that those 55 are really the right
Right,
mix of business
exactly.
that we want.
So it's really just saying, okay, team, revenue manage the space. If it's conventions versus local events.
I mean, there's one in particular in November. We had one group cancel, and then there was another group that was that was wanting the same dates. And that group got immediately booked into those dates. number one, we were hoping to have a couple of rest days for the team because it's going to be really busy and we didn't have any dark days. So it's like, well, actually that losing that group for the building and for our team was not a bad thing. Sales team did exactly what they should do. They knew that there was a group in wait. They booked them right away. But there's no food and beverage. It's not a bad group at all. They treat the building well and they treat the staff well and that sort of thing. But really, there's just no revenue. It's room rental. And they put a lot of people in each hotel room. So it's not like one person, one room. So that's the kind of group that we probably would say, you know, not a great group for Boise Center and defer off. And then again, November is a huge month for local events, particularly fundraisers and that sort of thing. So chances are that we could have filled one of those nights with a fundraising event or a gala that would have generated lots of revenue and only, you know, and even if we left another day or two open dark, we still would have made more money on that one event than we will on the convention that's coming in. So that's the kind of revenue management balance that we do chase as we look at these pieces of business. And again, it's not that the groups are quote unquote bad groups. I don't know that we really have bad groups, but I mean, knock on wood, we're very fortunate with the type of clients that we deal with. But it's just it's that cold business side of just revenue that says, okay, what's best for the facility from a revenue standpoint, revenue management. So even if we go down to 60, I mean, and just manage how that looks, particularly in the big months for local events, reduce the number of conventions in those months, and then try to increase I mean, we're still going to have to give some discounts and things to get people in July and August and maybe June a little bit, but July and August particularly, which is okay because those are really neat months. And as we saw this July and August, I mean, and we'll talk about August in the regular board report, but it wasn't a record. It was close to a record August. So, you know, we had a record July, record August, or pretty close both months. So
it's really just, you've got two pieces of business on your table. And one is a local event that has a higher revenue, one's a convention that has lower revenue, but brings more economic impact. Which one do you choose, right? And we're saying, pick which one is best revenue wise.
And I think it's gonna depend on the month too, is like, hey,
Right,
when does this
exactly.
make sense if we can push them into more of a local month? That's like, hey, the idea would be to get both, in all honesty,
Right,
it would be the
exactly,
best,
right.
as long as we got the space. Now we're running up to the occupancy percentages where it's like, hey, we're having to go, if we're gonna take that group, we're gonna lose this group. So it is just, me and Emery talked about getting the system set up for a few more KPIs so we can kind of track it, put them into our system and say, here's so it's all eyes wide open for the two teams as far as the local event planning team and the sales team to kind of look at what piece of business is and then kind of use us as a decision maker if we need to be.
Because I know, in this session, I think with Jody and I, it's like, we'd like to see the revenue or the margin start to kind of go back up a little bit, or at least flatten out and not continue to, you know, because again, the discussion is, well, if we continue to, that's not sustainable. So,
yeah, I mean, this is a conversation we even had, I don't know, Chris and I, a year or two ago, was just that, you know, we can, if economic impact is going, we want to do 50 million in economic impact, we can make it happen, but we'll go broke doing it. We won't have any money left in a very, very short period of time. So, you know, this isn't a totally new conversation, but it's just to the point now where it's like, okay, you know, start making some decisions. And quite frankly, it's the market is telling us this, you know, that, hey, now's the time because we've got these new hotels coming on. There continues to be pent up demand outside of the core for people who want to be in Boise, and they're staying outside of the core. They're staying out, you know, the hotels out towards Meridian and Napa, which are great properties, absolutely. But a lot of people would rather be downtown. And so as long as that compression is sustained and maintained, but we're going to have to see because you got two new hotels going in out by Eagle and Overland, part of Ball Ventures and Tommy's project. There's some new hotels coming in downtown, so, and I haven't paid a lot of attention to Napa Caldwell, but last time I was driving out, I thought I saw a couple of new, select service properties out of the Napa Caldwell area. So, as we get more hotels, at some point we'll reach probably a balance, not saturation, but a balancing where, people have a choice where they stay and there's not necessarily that compression existing. Few years, but it's probably coming.
We anticipate some of the margins are gonna come back and things like right now, the labor market is getting pinched, the supply chain is getting pinched, so some of those will just naturally, so we're trying not to overreact either on pricing and go overprice food and beverage and then all of a sudden realize that things are gonna come back into, so we're trying to balance that as well of what our pricing is for the local market, what they can take as far as increases, and also some of it's, we just don't want to overreact to the temporary food costs that are going on.
So again, no action item here. We just want to make sure that brought, let's get you up to speed. And we'll do a very high level at the regular board meeting when High is here, just again. This is our current blush on it with some tweaks to be made over the course of the next month. If anybody has any questions along the way, just call, let us know. Happy to go over, answer any other questions that might pop up for board. And then formal request for approval at the October meeting so that we can notify the bond holders that, or the,
We're gonna renew the lease.
yeah, thanks. For
On
Boise
Boise
Center
Center East.
because that's got a November 1 due date on it that we have to notify them. So notify the trustees. So
That's probably an important note too, those 35% margins were prior to Boise Center East usually, so once East came on, our margins did go change a little bit into that 25%, so.
well, again, we actually took, that's when we started taking on more conventions. In fact, we were joking internally. It used to be that when we were up to 25, 30 conventions, it's like we were doing the happy dance, like, wow, look at what we're doing. And it's kind of ironic now to be at 65 to 70 and going, we might have to temper this a bit. So be careful what you wish for, but we got there. So
Credit to the sales team for doing what they.
it's actually kind of fun being in the position we're in right now.
I ask you a question, Pat, so the margins, the escalator and elevator maintenance is a huge capital expenditure as well, right? It's
Well, the
like
problem is it's not,
500,000, right?
well, and to your point, I mean, it's, those aren't capital items either. I mean, they were capital projects, but the residual maintenance contracts and the management agreement we have with Gardner,
Condo.
those were all new expenses after we opened 2016. So we've added significant expense loads that we didn't have. But again.
And for that maintenance agreement, it can't be capitalized, and historically, we would have tried to put that into a capital budget, so now we're expensing it, and we're amortizing it over several years, so it's, again, things like that are continuing just to take little bites, it's impactful.
So it's darn accounting people who make us do things the right way.
I say that because sometimes, it is conventions and those are wonderful, but wearing my former hat at the CBB and coming from hotels, it's still, I can remember times when it's very lean and putting heads and beds is still really important. That's why the aquatic facility, hockey tournaments, all that stuff, so it's, and I remember just telling the story that escalators and elevators are really expensive when we went to multi-story, that's a big expense. But then it's also amazing to be able to do things like Clearwater Analytics last week, connect 800 people. It's pretty phenomenal. And I had people stop me and say, what is happening at the Beauty Center this week? Because they saw so many people out with their lanyards on. And I think that's still a novelty post-COVID that you see that many people. Thank you for letting me chime in.
That's where we also hold, aquatics, first grade annual.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions for us or?
And we'll have some strategic objectives to kind of present with the budget as far as what you were talking about, kind of how we're gonna dial it down, so. Future goals.
Anything else?
Well, that's all we have for the board on work session stuff, so. We want to,
Little break, super adjourn.
yeah, adjourn until 2.